The student was found in her dorm room. The police had several disturbing clues at once, but none of them brought them any closer to catching the culprit. The truth was discovered only a year later, but along with it, even more disturbing aspects appeared in this case that haunt investigators to this day. Stacey Pannell was born on September 5, 1967 in the small American town of Ripple, Mississippi. She had a younger brother and sister with whom she spent a lot of time and got along well. Stacey was an energetic person and had many friends. At school, she loved to take part in daily activities. After graduating from high school in 1985, she attended Northeast Mississippi Community College, located in the small college town of Boonwell. Despite the fact that it was about 30 minutes away from home, the girl decided to move into a hostel. From the first days of her studies, Stacey was excited about college. On October 7, 1985, Stacey went to after-school practice, saw her boyfriend, and attended a party on campus. At midnight, she and her friends returned to the hostel, talked a little with them, and went to bed. At about 3:30, her roommate named Emmy also returned to the dorm after the party. She lost her keys and had to knock on the door of her room. They were designed for 2 occupants, so only Stacey could open it for her. However, there was no response to the knock on the door. Emmy stood there for several minutes and then decided to knock on the next room. The dorm was set up in such a way that there was one shared bathroom between 2 rooms, so Emmy could walk to hers through the bathroom from the next room. A student named Stephanie lived there. She woke up from a knock and opened the door for her. Both girls were surprised that Stacey did not react to the knock and went into her room together. It was pitch black, and the only light came from a very weak lamp. Emmy walked into the room and saw Stacey lying in her bed. Only one of her legs was hanging down, and in general the girls thought that something was wrong with her friend. Coming closer, she noticed with horror the blood on her bed. Moving away from the shock, the girl ran out of the room to call for help. Her scream brought other students running, and the dorm security guard called 911. The police arrived at the scene and were faced with a disturbing sight. Stacey was dead, and there were traces of blood all over the room. The girl had a pillow over her face, and her underwear was pulled down. Investigators also noticed that there was a cutout in the mosquito net on the window. Next to the bed, they found a wooden rifle that Stacey had used in marching band parades. She was covered in blood and wrapped in a towel. The police suggested that it was she who was used as the murder weapon. Upon closer examination of the crime scene, forensic scientists discovered a short hair on the victim's bed. All this was enough to understand an approximate picture of what happened. Someone made a hole in the window of Stacey's room, climbed in, abused the girl, and killed her. But several inconsistencies were quickly found in this version. The hole in the mosquito net was too small for an adult to fit through. The window was located at some distance from the ground, which only made the task more difficult for the criminal. The police also did not find that cut piece of mesh. In addition, medical experts examined the victim's body and found no traces of male biological material. This cast doubt on the idea that the victim was assaulted. At the same time, the pathologist confirmed that it was highly likely that the murder weapon was indeed a wooden rifle. The injury corrector indicated that the victim was struck several times with the object. Experts also did not find any defensive wounds on her body. This indicated that the victim did not fight back the attacker. Forensic scientists collected all the potential evidence from Stacey's room, but none of it helped in the investigation. At the time, DNA testing was not yet in use, so investigators were unable to examine blood samples and other possible biological traces. In addition, there were no fingerprints on the murder weapon because the perpetrator had wiped them off with a towel. Despite this, detectives still hoped that experts would be able to find them in the room. Therefore, we decided to take fingerprints from everyone who, in theory, could get into the dormitory. This task turned out to be quite difficult. The police had to talk to hundreds of college students and ask them to volunteer their fingerprints. They also took them from all male employees. The problem was that only girls lived in this dormitory, and a special key was needed to enter the building. Men could get there in only a few cases. They had to be let in by residents of the dormitory, or by college employees who had the key. Despite this, the girls constantly invited their boyfriends and male friends, which is why detectives had to spend a lot of time collecting fingerprints from them. In the end, all this did not lead to any results, since prints were never found at the murder scene. Having no leads, the investigators turned to a psychologist and asked him to draw up psychological portraits of the killer. Having studied all the available information, the specialist suggested that the attacker was a man between 20 and 24 years old with a strong build and no criminal history. Most likely, this crime was not planned in advance. According to the psychologist, the killer saw an opportunity and decided to attack the victim. This description made detectives even more doubtful that the culprit entered the room through the window. The hole in the mosquito net was too small for a strong adult man to fit through. Meanwhile, panic reigned among the college students. The girls were afraid to be in their dormitories, afraid of becoming the next victim of an unknown criminal. The fact that the police could not find a single clue only increased the overall anxiety. Detectives continued to search for possible suspects and decided to check on Stacey's boyfriend, Domi Osborne. They searched his dorm room and found nothing there that could indicate his involvement. They were also unable to establish whether he might have had a motive. According to Stacey's friend, the couple practically did not quarrel, and they did not have any problems. From the victim's parents, investigators learned that Stacey had another boyfriend before going to college, with whom she broke up just a few months ago. His name was Ben, and the couple dated for a long time during their school days. The young man even gave her a ring and wanted to marry her in the future. But the girl decided to end this relationship. Ben did not want to put up with this and refused to take the ring back. Until Stacey left for college, he constantly tried to see her, but the girl did not change her decision. Detectives spoke to him, and the youth said he was sleeping at his home the night of the murder. His mother confirmed that he went to bed at about 11 p.m. and was at home in the morning. However, investigators assumed that Ben could have left the house unnoticed, driven to Stacey's college, killed her, and then returned back. He was offered to undergo interrogation using a polygraph, and the young man agreed. The results turned out to be contradictory. The operator could not determine whether he was telling the truth. After this, another interrogation was conducted, which led to the same result. This alerted detectives, but without any evidence they could not link him to the crime. Experts were trying to determine whether the hair found on Stacey's bed could have belonged to the young man. But here they could not come to any definite conclusion. Considering that DNA analysis was not yet used in those years, it was not possible to confirm or refute this. Based on the indeterminate polygraph results, Ben became the prime suspect in the case. However, Stacey's relatives did not believe that the young man could harm her. They described him as a kind and well-mannered man who always took care of her. Moreover, without evidence, the police still could not charge him, so they continued to work on finding clues. After some time, they re-examined the case file, and this time they noticed something really strange. Looking at the cutout on the mosquito net, they saw that its fibers, together with the cut, were directed towards the street. This meant that the perpetrator cut out this piece while he was in Stacey's room and not on the street. This discovery further confused the detectives. If the killer did not enter the building through a window, then he must have had a key or entered with one of the residents. However, the police doubted that this was possible. There was a security guard in the dormitory who sat near the entrance and saw everyone who came and went. For several months, there was no progress in this matter. Then the chief detective decided to enlist the help of Steve Rhodes, the sheriff of Illinois, who was very well known in police circles. A man practiced a special approach to interrogation based on neuro-linguistic programming. He often spoke at police seminars and had a reputation for being able to extract information from almost any suspect, as well as detect lies. Steve agreed to interview 4 people involved in the case: the victim's neighbors, Emmy and Stephanie, as well as Ben and Domi. In September 1986, he started work, and the first thing he did was talk to Emmy. She told him everything she knew, and the policeman found no reason to doubt her words. Following her, he talked with Stephanie. The girl said that that evening she took a painkiller that the doctor prescribed for her for inflammation and fell asleep. At about 1:30, she heard Stacey and her friends return to the dorm and talking loudly in her room. Stephanie came in and asked them to keep their voices down. After that, the friends went to their rooms, and Stephanie went to bed. It seemed to Steve Rhodes that the girl was holding back some important details. He told her that she was lying and asked her to tell the truth. Stephanie insisted that she was not deceiving him, but the policeman continued to bombard her with questions. And at some point the girl said that she actually returned to Stacey's room after her friends left. For detectives, this came as a real surprise. Almost a year after the murder, they finally received new details and continued to closely monitor the interrogation. After a long pause, Stephanie spoke again, and to the surprise of everyone, she admitted that it was she who killed Stacey. According to the girl, she came into her room to chat. At some point, the conversation turned to Dom Osborne, Stacey's boyfriend. Stephanie gave him a few compliments, and Stacey didn't like it. She demanded that Stephanie stay away from Domi, but the girl continued to talk about him. After another remark, Stacey slapped her in the face, and Stephanie responded in kind. A struggle ensued between the girls, and at some point Stephanie grabbed a wooden rifle that was lying next to the bed. She hit Stacey, and she fell on the bed. After that, Stephanie hit her several more times until she stopped moving. Seconds later, Stephanie saw the blood and realized what she had done. She panicked and decided to get rid of the evidence. The girl locked the door to the room and washed her hands of the blood. After that, she decided to make it look like someone had broken into Stacey's room, assaulted her, and killed her. Stephanie placed a pillow over her head and lowered her underwear. Next, she took out a knife, cut a hole in the mosquito net with it, and put it in Stacey's closet under a pile of clothes. After that, the girl wiped a wooden rifle with a towel and took a shower to wash off traces of blood. Then she decided to get rid of her tank top and a piece of cut-out mesh. Stephanie locked herself in the bathroom and burned them right there with a lighter. To somehow kill the smell of smoke, she sprayed a large amount of perfume. Having finished covering her tracks, the girl went to bed and woke up only when Emmy knocked on her door. The detectives were shocked by this story. For a whole year, they didn't even think about the fact that the killers could have been a woman, much less the victim's neighbor in the dorm. Stephanie was charged with murder and arrested. 3 days later, she sent a letter to her boyfriend, whom she had dated in college for about a week. On 11 pages, the girl described to him the details of what happened and said that it was an accident. Stephanie wrote that she took a lot of painkillers that day and couldn't think straight. She supposedly didn't even remember the moment of the murder. But all this year she sighed in nightmares. A few days after the letter was sent, another unexpected turn occurred in this matter. The girl stated that Steve Rhodes put her into a kind of trance using his techniques and placed this confession in her head. She insisted that she could not have killed Stacey, and the police were simply using her vulnerable state to finally close this high-profile case. According to the girl, the painkillers confused her mind, so Steve Rhodes managed to convince her for some time that she had really killed her neighbor. In 1987, a judge held a 3-day hearing to determine whether her words were true. Detectives insisted that Stephanie was not under any serious pressure and was not hypnotized. According to them, in her confession, the girl named some details that only the killer could know. For example, Stephanie pointed out exactly where she put away the knife she used to cut the mosquito net. Detectives did not find it during their initial investigation of the crime scene, but after Stephanie's words, they returned to the room and indeed found it in the closet under a stack of clothes. True, there were also some nuances here. Firstly, the girls were neighbors and often visited each other's rooms, so Stephanie could find out his location under other circumstances. Secondly, no examination could confirm or deny that the mesh was cut with this particular knife. However, the judge concluded that Stephanie's initial testimony was not obtained through hypnosis or any other manipulation. The trial began in 1988. Stephanie's lawyers continued to insist that the confession was obtained under duress and pointed out the complete lack of evidence against their client. They also emphasized that the lie detection tactics used by Steve Rhodes had no scientific support and could not legally be used in court. The man assured that he was able to understand whether a person was lying or not by observing the movement of his eyes. In addition, the lawyers received the results of a medical examination, according to which Stephanie's cognitive abilities may have been suppressed due to the course of painkillers. This made her more vulnerable to manipulation such as hypnosis. The prosecution insisted that Stephanie knew details that were not known to the investigator at the time of questioning, so her testimony was believable. Before the trial, an investigative experiment was also conducted with the girl, asking a doctor of psychological sciences to try to hypnotize her. The expert came to the conclusion that he had never managed to plunge the girl into such a state. The victim's relatives also shared interesting information. According to them, Stacey mentioned Stephanie several times and considered her a problem person, as if she was even afraid of her. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and the jury ultimately found Stephanie guilty of manslaughter. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison, of which the woman spent 9 years behind bars, after which she was released early. Once freed, the woman continued to insist on her innocence. She hired lawyers who tried to get the case reviewed. While studying it, lawyers noticed similarities with another murder committed in 1993. Then a man named Charles Crawford attacked a girl who lived 40 minutes from the college where Stacey studied. The two cases had several similarities. First, the victim also attended Northeast Mississippi Community College. Secondly, the criminal entered her house by cutting a hole in the mosquito net. Stephanie and her lawyers believe that Crawford is behind Stacey's murder. The man was arrested in 1993 and later sentenced to death. The problem is that without evidence, it is very difficult to prove his involvement. However, there are some nuances here too. Stephanie's lawyers did a great job and determined that a drop of blood was found on a wooden rifle that did not belong to Stacey. DNA analysis of this evidence has not been carried out to this day, since this requires a retrial of the case. In addition, lawyers submitted the victim's underwear for an independent examination, and there they were able to extract a DNA sample from an unknown man. However, this sample was never entered into the FBI database to be compared with Crawford's DNA, since this would also require a review of the case. But even here, there is no guarantee that the found sample is somehow connected with the murder. Using the version of Crawford's involvement, the lawyer points to several more facts. During those years, he lived near the college, and a few days before the murder, 2 witnesses allegedly saw him near the campus. However, there is currently no reliable confirmation of the latter. Despite the similarities between the two crimes, there are also some inconsistencies. The hole was nevertheless cut from the room to the outside, which excludes the possibility of the criminal entering from the street. In addition, Crawford's height was 186 centimeters, and he most likely would not have been able to fit into such a small hole. Another point of contention is that the killer used Stacey's wooden rifle as a weapon. If Crawford had actually decided to sneak into the victim's room and kill her, it's hard to imagine that he wouldn't have taken any weapons with him. At the moment, Stephanie and her lawyers are still trying to get a review of the case, which will allow them to compare the evidence with Crawford's DNA. The man is still awaiting execution in prison, and he even talked to detectives about Stacey's case, but the cops were never able to determine whether he was near the college on the night of the murder. Perhaps in the foreseeable future, DNA analysis will be carried out, but until then, this case is considered closed. Stacey's relatives do not believe Stephanie's stories and are convinced that she is the killer. Investigators who worked on the case also believe the involvement of another person is unlikely.